Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes, and this is Washington Unplugged. Thanks for joining us. Hospital executive and former Bush advisor Jim Towey ignited conservative fires last week when he published a piece in the Wall Street Journal condemning the Veterans Administration for publishing and distributing a 52-page document titled Your Life, Your Choices, which has since been dubbed the death book by some. Now, conservatives, including Rush Limbaugh, argue that the VA is prompting elderly veterans to, quote, pull the plug on themselves. To find out exactly what this book says and what it means, I'm joined now by Baram. He's the news editor at the Huffington Post, and I'm joined on the phone by Jim Towey from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a story that should be simple, but it's kind of confusing because there are a lot of competing claims going on right now. So, Mr. Towey, let's start with you and tell me what it is about this document. It's a 52-page book that is an option for veterans to read called Your Life, Your Choices, Planning for Future Medical Decisions, How to Prepare a Personalized Living Will. What is it specifically about this that you find objectionable?
Well, first of all, you have a document that's been written by an advocate of assisted suicide. He's very prominent in that circle. That's tilted in a way, I think, that's biased and kind of pushes our veterans to a discernment of whether their life is worth living or not. And it has a checklist that has questions like, I can't seem to shake the blues, and you can check a box there saying my life would not be worth living under these conditions. It uses the word vegetable in the document and referring to people, and I think that's making people feel less than human. And it describes being a vegetable as you sit in a chair and don't do anything all day. And it just seems to me like for the VA and the government, which has a financial stake in the decisions people make at the end of life, it seems to me the government should be a heck of a lot more neutral, shouldn't be biasing the discussion in favor of a hastened death. And I just think it guilt trips veterans and makes them feel the message is, hurry up and die.
Marcus, what makes this so confusing is that the VA actually says this booklet isn't even being used, hasn't been used for years, it's being revised. And yet Mr. Towey says it was on their website until recently. So what's the real story here?
Well, it has been available on their website until recently. I mean, to me, it seems a little bit like a manufactured controversy because it's been around for over 10 years. It's a workbook that basically provides a lot of the same advanced care planning guidelines that are actually mandatory under federal law and required at most hospitals. When you enter the hospital, they give you this type of information. And it's got support of veterans groups, it's got support from interfaith groups, and it seems like no one really complained about this until Mr. Towey recently wrote his op-ed.
Well, Mr. Towey, what about that? This pamphlet, as Marcus said, was created a dozen years ago. Are you worried that publicizing your issues with it now, just while people are up in arms over these so-called death panels, only gives credence to this discredited notion?
No, Nancy. First of all, it's available on the website today. I went on this morning. You can still get Your Life, Your Choices, so the VA hasn't pulled it down. Second, it was a July directive by Undersecretary Dr. Cross that was issued to VA providers that updated their handbook on advanced care planning that specifically directed people to Your Life, Your Choices. So when it's suggested that the VA hasn't been promoting it of late, they just put a directive out last month. And so I think what's really going on is for some time within the belly of the Veterans Affairs bureaucracy, there was an effort to promote this kind of document. And now that it's come to the surface and light shined upon it, I think a lot of Americans feel like we can do better for our veterans.
So do you think that there is some kind of underlying goal within the VA to try to get veterans to pull the plug early so they can save money? Is that what you think is going on here?
I think government has to be very, very sensitive when it's involved in an end-of-life care discussion because there will always be that fear that people have that they're being pushed to refuse care. What I want to know is why would the VA endow upon an assisted suicide advocate and then refer people to the only advanced directive resource, which is the Hemlock Society? I mean, it seems
but
to
that's
me
not. But they're no longer advising people to do that, right? That's been taken down.
They did take it down, but
like
on both
years
editions,
ago.
only after criticism was raised, and this is, I think, the pattern on this document, is that when you point out something like this, they say, oh, well, we better pull that down because that's controversial. Why in the world why would they have had it in the first place on both editions? The other one was Choice in Dying, which was previously the Euthanasia Society. So I think the bias of the document is clear, and our veterans deserve better.
Okay, you talk about the bias in the document, but I've looked at some of the passages that you're specifically concerned about, and it seems to me they're really open to interpretation. For example, you say that when the booklet asks veterans to examine what makes your life worth living, that's somehow a negative question. Couldn't that just as easily be a positive question? Hey, think about what it is in your life, your family, your kids, your friends, that makes life worth living.
Nancy, I'd buy that if there was also a choice that when they ask what makes your life worth living, if there was a box that says, my life is worth living now. I find it thoroughly meaningful and fulfilling. Yes, I have a disability. That's the problem. I think it treats human life as if it's a little diminished if you have a stroke or if you have dementia. And if you looked at the second edition that they were promoting in June of '07, which is the first one I saw, that document was so biased in the case studies on stroke and coma that I think anyone giving it a fair reading would look at it and say, gee, this sure seems like it's tilted toward denial of care.
Marcus, what do you think? Because there do seem to be a few strange passages in here, including a line that Mr. Towey referenced earlier that asks, quote, have you ever heard anyone say, if I'm a vegetable, pull the plug?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually quite a neutral document that's very similar to, like I said before, this advanced care planning that's provided around the country at hospitals under federal law. And there are a few passages where they use, I think, terms that are a little more colloquial, that are meant to be a little more basic for, not using medical language, but terms that people know. A vegetable is a term that might not be the most politically correct term, but it's a term that obviously people use to describe someone in that state. And what I find interesting here is that most veterans groups don't seem to have a problem with this document, as well as people in the medical community who deal with ethics and end-of-life issues.
Mr. Towey, isn't it true that anyone who's getting Medicare funding, any organization, any part of the government, has to make end-of-life consulting available, and that this is just one of many pamphlets that are available to veterans?
Oh, I'm a big fan of advanced care planning. I think it's very important for families to do. I've spent 12 years of my life since I founded Aging with Dignity to promote these kind of discussions. The problem is that when government is not only involved in the discussion but has a stake in the answer you give, there should be some sensitivity. And while the VA will say, oh, gee, this is just one of a bunch of tools, when you look at the record, and I think this will come up in the congressional hearings, the VA has exclusively promoted Your Life, Your Choices, and in fact, today it's still on their website. I just find it impossible to believe, and I think a lot of veterans groups, when you haven't heard opposition from them, it's because they don't know about it. This document has been floating under the radar, and I think their efforts to now put it out there with that new July directive ought to alarm a lot of people.
Well, it's certainly getting a lot of attention now, and I want to bring up one final point before we go, which is that you wrote your own end-of-life document. It's called Five Wishes, which the VA declined to buy. Is there any part of your opposition to this booklet that can be interpreted as perhaps sour grapes, that they didn't choose your booklet?
No, because 13 million Americans are using Five Wishes, and in fact, many VA facilities use Five Wishes. My talk with the Veterans Administration, I went up there to see what they were using, and of course I was going to show them Five Wishes because it's popular, and by the way, it's only a few pages to fill out versus this 52-page document. So, yeah, I went up there to discuss it with that, but it's a not-for-profit organization. It doesn't live or die by the VA blessing or no blessing. So people want to do that argument, I think, make that argument to try to divert attention from the fact that here the VA has taken the assisted suicide approach to end-of-life discussions. I think it's wrong. I think life has value. It's not diminished when someone gets disability or it comes back from Iraq missing.
It's not the assisted suicide approach. I mean, you focus on that. It provides all sorts of advice for people who are at that stage in lives, which is common with advanced care planning.
Marcus, I say assisted suicide approach because when you frame the issue in terms of autonomy, quality of life, and the opportunity for people to say, I want maximum control over these matters, without giving people an opportunity to make sense of their life with disability, I think it's tilted. I think that's the way they frame it is, gee, your quality of life is so bad you can't shake the blues. Maybe life isn't worth living. We can do better for veterans. It can be a more balanced discussion.
But veterans don't feel that way. But veterans don't feel that way. They're the ones who are the target audience, and they don't feel upset or pressured.
It seems like a lot of this all has to do with your state of mind and where you're coming from, because a lot of these questions in here, I mean, it is a sensitive topic, so the questions by nature are sensitive, and it does seem like the kind of thing that's tough to get just right. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much. We're going to get to the VA and hear what they have to say in a moment, but for now, Marcus Baram, news editor at the Huffington Post, and Jim Towey from Latrobe, Pennsylvania, who wrote the article that got this controversy started in the first place. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now to get to the Veterans Administration side of the story, we're joined by Chaplain Juliana Lesher on the phone. Chaplain, thank you so much for joining us. What do you think of this charge that's being laid by Jim Towey, former Bush administration official, that your document implies that life does not have full value?
Let me begin by saying that this is just one of many options that could be given to a veteran. This is clearly just an educational workbook. It is clearly not the official position of the VA. The VA has an official advance directive, but in addition to that, we as a VA hospital chaplain, the key thing is when we go in is to speak and to find out what is the personal belief and the preference of the veteran and his or her family. And that's the key thing that I want to stress. The booklet, Your Life, Your Choice, is something that was written 10 years ago. It is currently being revised and updated, and it is not something that is being used on a regular basis. As a chaplain that has worked in many cases, many end-of-life cases with our veterans and has a deep respect, I have a deep respect, and I know and my chaplain colleagues have a deep respect and value for the life of our veterans and their service to our country. We are there to meet that veteran right where he or she is and to help them come to decisions that are in line with their personal belief system. I can testify to the fact of having contacted people from various faith perspectives, leaders. I will go in and speak with a veteran, and if I don't have a resource in my particular office that's from their unique faith perspective, have called people from that faith perspective, that denominational perspective, to say, would you have something from your particular belief system that I could bring to share with this veteran who is professing this particular belief? As VA chaplains, we are here to help people understand what they believe and to help them make serious decisions.
You say that the document is being revised. Is that because you think that it maybe was a little bit too raw and kind of cut to the bone on a few sensitive issues?
It's being considered and looked at. There are things that I think when we go along in the process of being able to look at, this could have been worded better, but it was something that was never intended, clearly, and make this very clear, it was never intended to be the decision-making tool for veterans. It has always been considered one of many options.
And yet doctors in these latest directives, weren't they told to share specifically this document with their patients?
That would not be, no. We have, again, we're meeting people. The key thing, and I know I work with, palliative care physicians and social workers, palliative care social workers, and as chaplains, and I can testify, and I will also ask, I'd ask Mr. Towey to come in and to, come to our hospice unit and to see how we approach families. What we are clearly doing, whether it be our physicians, whether it be our social workers, whether it be us as chaplains or nurses, is finding out where the patient is, where the veteran is. What is your background? What is your understanding? Sadly, many of our veterans, as with many people, have not thought about these end-of-life issues, and they're looking for resources, and I will testify that we're providing them the educational resources from their particular faith perspective, as well as giving them many educational tools. It is not something that we are promoting to them.
As you know, some conservatives, I should say some, have seized on this document as proof, they say, that you see what happens when you get the government involved in health care. The government has a financial interest in there being fewer people on the rolls, and they may push patients to choose not to prolong their lives with extraordinary measures, but to say, okay, if I'm not doing well, please don't try to resuscitate me, just pull the plug. Are you concerned about this implication?
I find the article that was in last week in the Wall Street Journal and the accusations very sad to hear these things. As a VA chaplain who is personally daily caring for our veterans, meeting their needs, that is my goal is to honor that veteran, to honor his or her life. And I would not, and I will testify, I would not be working for the VA if that's what we were doing. I have a strong regard for life. I consider myself an evangelical and have a very strongly believe in life, and I would not be doing what I do and not be caring for our veterans every day if that would be the way that we would be treating our veterans.
Chaplain Juliana Lesher from the Veterans Administration, thank you so much for joining us by phone today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged on this controversial day. But join us every weekday at cbsnews.com at 12:30, where we tackle topics just like this. I'm Nancy Cordes. Thanks so much for joining us.